Okay, so we are going to leave the chairs up. We're going to change microphones. I hope our next panel is controversial. I worked with Max Steckler, who had led the product team on the digital suite of products for CDK for years. I asked my good friends Joe Chura, Jen Cole, David Metter, and Jonah to come up and be part of this discussion because you've heard my theme that it's 2019 and OEMs are using outdated metrics to compare website platforms, paid advertising. Dealers have no real actionable metrics. Who's going to take responsibility for really bringing this industry together? So maybe someone from the PCG team can bring up one more chair. We're going to, no, Max will probably stand, so we're fine. We're fine on the chairs. But let me put it this way. I'll tell you one story that just drove me nuts. An OEM reached out to me and said, we would like some help defining metrics for digital retailing. I said, great. I put together a proposal. And then I got notified, I'm sorry, we're not going to go with you because someone's going to do it for free. I said, okay, that's fantastic. I'm pretty busy. I said, well, what metrics are they going to use? Like, are they going to see which buttons are clicked, how far they got down? No, they're just going to put a pixel on the site and see if time on site increased and the number of page views increased. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You mean they're going to try to build metrics without seeing how consumers use the tools? They're not going to create custom events, create standards for events? And they're like, no, that's not what they're going to do. I said, good luck. That's not going to help the industry get any better. So with that being said, the topic here is, if we're really honest, what metrics should we be using to measure the performance of all the products that are being sold to you? So would you please welcome our panel and our moderator, Max Steckler.
Hey, come on up, guys. Coming up, as they're all making their way up here, a couple of comments. First off, I love coming to these conferences. I've been to a number of these throughout the years and been to Brian's conferences and a lot of them, and have been in the industry for close to 20 years and driving on things. And it's always so great to know that when you come to a conference, the themes always seem to be the same, right? I mean, think about it. What do we keep hearing about here? We're hearing about transparency, right? Transparency of what are the numbers that we're looking at? What are we trying to do for our consumers? Put in front of them. We're talking about efficiency. We're spending a ton of money, right? This morning really had some gasping numbers against it. Clearly not a surprise to everybody, right? But efficiency is important, whether it's how you do your marketing spend or whether it's the efficiency of how you message with your customers, just like in the messaging that we looked at. And then collaboration, right? It's a really big deal. How do we all end up working together? Brian, this conference has been great to do that, to bring everybody together, not just dealers, but bring in vendors, bring in OEMs, and we all kind of participate. And I think that's a really good thing. So Brian reached out to me a couple of months ago and was saying we're having the conference, and so he mentioned I used to run products over at CDK, and now I work for a small startup that's pre-launch phase, and I thought this is really awesome. I'm not going to be on the actual panel. I get to be up here and talk and not have a dog in the hunt, which is pretty damn fun, to be honest with you. And as I thought about it, I said, great, I'll do it. Tell me what you'd like me to do. And he said, hey, why don't you host a panel? So he lays out for me, why don't you do this one? So who in the world would want to do a panel about what metrics are in digital advertising at one of that guy's conferences? Who would possibly want to do that, right? I mean, I was listening to all the things that he was saying this morning, and I was thinking to myself, come on, Brian, really? You're going to take every single thing we're going to talk about? I anticipated that he would do that, right? So we're going to have a really interesting panel here because this whole conversation is going to come up a level. Yeah, we're going to talk about what some of the metrics are. But when you really think about how to do your measurement, you got to come up and you got to consider who's involved in setting those measurements and why the hell are we setting them? And what's going on as we go through those metrics? What are the stakes that are happening, and who's holding those stakes? And so we're going to explore what some of those are, and we're going to hopefully get into some spicy topics, and they may resist saying certain things. I'm going to keep poking them, hopefully, so we can get those things out. But we'll end up figuring it out, because we've got a huge ecosystem to deal with here. And those of you that have been in the industry for a long time, you know that you've got OEMs, and you've got groups, and you've got dealers, and vendors, and media providers, and tool providers. Got whole things around advertising and media and connections that have to happen. And don't forget about the tools, the DMS, the inventory management. I mean, it's limitless, right? And that's the problem in front of all of us. So we do think it's important that we come up a bit and we take a look at what is it that really matters within our ecosystem right now, collectively with each other. Take a look at what some of the good moves are to make right now, and then also look at what's going to happen in the future as we go forward. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask our panel, starting here with my good friend Joe, have them just do a quick introduction to themselves, and then we'll get into some questions. Again, moving. Joe? Welcome. Is he on? There we go.
Turn it on, will help. My name is Joe Chur. I'm the CEO of Dealer Inspired. Been in the auto space for going on 21 years. This is, I think, my 5th DMSC. It was the first conference I ever went to on the auto side. So very excited to be here on a panel. It's going to be fun.
Excellent. I guess I have my own mic. So most of you are probably tired of seeing me by now. This is like the 3rd time for some of you. So I'm not going to do much of an introduction other than I'm just fortunate to sit next to Joe. I want to know, I sell my company, I have to bring my own cup up for a company that I don't even work for. Joe has a handler. Somebody brings water to him.
She's a great client.
That's awesome. Where's your water?
You have your own mic. Share. I am Jen Cole. Actually worked with Max for many years. I've been in the auto digital marketing space for 18 years now, and just recently took over running the full digital business at CDK. So working with dealers, dealer groups, and our OEM clients. Thanks for having us.
I'm Joe Nicole. I've been in the automotive space for about 9 years. I was hired by a guy named Bryce Englert. I don't know if any of you guys have trade pending. He's a good guy. I was willing to work, and it satisfied a condition of my parole, so it was a win-win. It was really a win-win. So I've been in the auto space ever since because nobody else will have me. But I'm just excited to be here and add to the panel. I'm product manager at Dominion. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Fantastic.
Let's get it. I have no water, no one to come bring me water, and we have to share a mic.
Marla, I do want to say thank you to Marla. Thank you, Marla. Do you want some water? I can ask for a few people.
All right, so moving right along. I do want to point out that these two are actually not related. No, they're just brothers and sisters of another mother.
Yeah, they walked up on the stage together, though.
Yeah.
I changed my name when I saw this coming. So.
All right, so the first question, and since we've got a smaller panel here, I'm going to ask you guys if you feel like you got some good calorie stuff to put in, please jump in because I'd like to hear from all of you. You all have different kind of perspectives here. So the first thing, and Jen, I'll start with you, and then we'll kind of let it move around, is when you think about building a measurement strategy, who needs to be involved in setting that up if you're going to have a successful measurement strategy? And then what kind of rules of engagement do you think need to exist between the parties that interact on that strategy?
Sure. So the easy answer is you do. The dealerships have to be involved in setting metrics. I was lucky enough to have Kevin Fry come in to Dominion and present to us on kind of how he did it for the Weiler Group, and it really resonated with me. We've worked with OEMs. I've worked as a vendor. I've talked with a lot of dealerships. You have to start it. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but the OEM is never going to do it 100% for you because they're not interested in 100% of your business. The vendor is never going to 100% do it for you because they aren't interested in 100% of your business. We have a lot of passionate vendors here, right? We have a lot of passionate people who are very interested in solving problems for dealers. Sometimes that vendor wants to solve a small problem, but you have a larger problem, right? And so you have to set that standard of this is how I measure what comes in and how it affects my business. Now from there, you open up. And you can talk to, now you're talking to your vendor partner, your internal customers, right, your employees, getting them bought in. But it's got to start at that local grassroots level. That's my opinion. I think that's the only way to get it going.
Yeah, I think also for those of you who are marketers, CMOs, strategy, also making sure that you're including people within either your dealers or your dealer groups who are on the front line, so your front or back office people, so that from the beginning they know what your objectives are and how you're working with your partners to drive results. Otherwise, you're going to have your sales manager out there Googling themselves and wanting to know why they're not coming up at the top, right? Because they don't understand what you're measuring as success. I think the other, as far as rules of engagement, I think you definitely own your success and how you want to measure it. But I stress that it's got to be a constant ecosystem of data feeding. So we've talked a lot about how the vendors and partners need to be transparent with our data. I think the best partnerships are where that's two-way data sharing, right? So how are you measuring success in your business? Do you have market share reports? How are you knowing if you're winning in your market? Those kinds of things. That kind of ongoing data sharing really helps to refine and make your strategies more effective.
Gentlemen, anything else?
I think you nailed it. It really starts with dealers. Dealers talking with the vendor partners. I mean, to me, a lot of it boils down to things that are much more macro level, like how many cars did we sell? And then working downstream from there to figure out what actually affected that. There are many times when we're sitting in front of dealers and they're Googling their own name, seeing if they come up for paid search, and you have to ask, like, what's the desired outcome here? Is it to come up every single time someone is on Google, or is it actually to help you sell more cars and service more cars?
So a question for you, Joe. When you engage and your organization engages with a new client, how much do you focus on setting what the standard is with them about what you're going to end up being measured on?
So what we found in terms of timing, I can't, it varies. There's dealers out there that aren't measuring the basics, like connecting Google Analytics to AdWords, right? And there's other dealers that are creating their own Google event-based attribution and so forth. So what we tend to focus on is, and what we ask for, because it seems to be the source of truth even outside of DMS matchbacks and so forth, is the CRM. And unfortunately, there's a lot of CRMs, there's a lot of vendors, and there are dealers who use CRMs in different ways. But what we try to look for is what is the measure of us doing a good job, essentially.
In their eyes?
I'm sorry?
In your client's eyes?
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes the measure of doing a good job is showing up for every single search, and sometimes it is helping them sell more vehicles. It sounds silly, but some dealers believe that if we send them leads, that's all we can do. And then there's other dealers that believe that if we're not selling them cars, then we're doing a poor job. So it's really setting the stage for what does a win look like in a dealer's eyes, and that does vary, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I think there's a big message here for everybody in the room. If you're a vendor, you have to make sure that your onboarding process includes that conversation about what is important to them and to listen, but you have to be prepared that they may not know. And you may need to bring best practices to the table and coax it out of them. But number one, get on the same page, right? You absolutely want to get on the same page. Okay, next question here. And I'm going to start this one over with David. So, we all know there's a lot of standard KPIs. We can talk blue in the face. I'm counting phone, I'm counting chats, I'm counting VDPs. Hopefully they're not direct VDP views from a click, but they're not all created equal. And we know that they're not all created equal. And there's a lot of things that go on. There's proprietary measurements from consultants, maybe like the guy in the room here, right? Which definitely, when I was at CDK, we supported. And there's other vendors that have their own proprietary metrics. We created some of those, and I know that Joe's got some of those, and Dealer.com has had them as well. And then there's also these network aggregators, right? That kind of shift the market around a little bit. So how do you sort of think about those sort of metrics and the roles of the proprietary metrics and the differences when people start to sort of, put what's important to them in front of things?
Well, I mean, I probably make it way too simple. I think about sales, and then backing into visitation, and then everything else kind of falls into place. Because if those two are aligned, and the dealer, or the OEM, whoever it is, says, okay, look, this is the end game, and then we know that we have to do this in order to get to the end game, I think everything else kind of falls into place. And then what I do, and this really ties in the last question, is I try to force, you talked about, kind of needling the dealer. I try to get somebody to get to a point where they ask the unanswerable question. Because I think what happens most of the time is everybody wants to conform to what we already know is in place. But if you get out of your comfort zone a little bit and you force somebody or you force yourself to ask a question that you know that there's not an answer to, hopefully you're surrounded by really smart people who want to figure that out. Whether it's the vendor side or the dealer side or even a strategic partner. And then all of those little gaps start to fill themselves in, and it makes it much easier to make decisions.
So Jen, do you think that all the participants that kind of come together are all trying to swim to the same sort of goal?
To me. Well, no. I mean, clearly we're all trying to navigate what the OEM wants. I mean, even dealer groups, the group entity may have different objectives and needs across their different stores. So it does come back to a lot of the communication, but the manufacturers have different goals, right? I mean, especially as we've moved into a world where they want to be able to measure, have some kind of consistent measurement across all the providers so that we can have an open ecosystem, right? They're looking at a standard set of KPIs that may not be very much focused on what consumers are doing down at the dealer level, right? And so I think that's an ecosystem that we're still trying to figure out how to navigate, frankly. And it's how do you balance showing well on an OEM scorecard at the same time doing the right thing for the consumers and then for the dealer. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have all the answers. I think being aware of the competing KPIs is important so that we can figure out how to navigate it together. And then it does come back around to that constant dialogue, right? But you should have partners who help you navigate that, right? I mean, we should all be clear around what the OEM's expectations are, and then what you or your store's expectations are, and how we're gonna navigate that together. So.
And if it doesn't start with the dealer, what I've seen happen is, as a vendor, we're a partner with a dealership or dealerships. But that dealership doesn't have just us as a vendor, so they have maybe 10 other vendors that help them with leads. But it's pretty unique in the sense that all these vendors are kind of competing for their own business and want to take credit for leads. But we're not on calls together trying to work on behalf of dealerships, right? So if a dealership doesn't provide that direction or doesn't say, hey, here's what I want, it is very difficult because we're all trying to get a piece of that pie as a vendor saying, we helped you generate X leads, right? And that's the challenge in this space sometimes is that, unfortunately and fortunately, there are a lot of great vendors out there, but those vendors together, we're not usually on calls with dealerships as a whole team looking holistically at the business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So a show of hands of the dealers, those who work in dealerships, how many of you have joint calls where you bring in multiple vendors at the same time? You find it valuable? Yeah? Does it keep you honest? Right? Everybody's there, you look at the numbers, get everybody on the same page.
But I bet if you ask the next question, how do you pick the vendors? Because not all vendors, I'm not calling people out, but not all vendors are going to play nicely with each other, even when even when you've got somebody sitting at the table that leads 50, 100 dealerships. Like I remember being a leader of 75 dealerships and having to choose a vendor that might not have been best in class because they wouldn't play nicely with the other vendor that I chose to go down a path with. And then you complicate it even more. I think Jen did a great job of saying it as nicely and politically correct as possible. But essentially, sometimes you got to pick. Like you have to pick. You have to pick a table. You have to pick a team. And sometimes you don't like the team that you picked. Is that a fair? I'm saying that. She's not saying that.
Co-op can drive you that way, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, part of the creation of Dealer Inspire was simply one of the three main reasons was we needed better access, we needed better control, we needed to provide data to our dealer partners in a way where we couldn't find good partners. So we decided to build it ourselves, and we've taken a stance to work with other agencies and groups because we know we're not going to be the solution for every single product and service for every single dealer out there.
Yeah. How ridiculous was it for me to think when I started AutoHook that nobody would be upset that we were driving qualified opportunities into the showroom? Like, I thought everybody could be aligned with that, and yet guess what happened? I had a bunch of digital marketing people who got really upset that we were proving that they might not have been the greatest tool in the world because they weren't driving qualified opportunities. And that's a rough place to be, especially when they had the connectivity to the OEMs. Got shut out.
Well, here's a question for you, and we'll start again with you, David, and go through. Should your media provider also be your agency? Whether it's websites or an advertising provider, should they be separate or can they be the same? And what's the pros and cons of that?
I mean, I feel like I'm selling out on this deal, but I think it's ultimately the decision of the dealer that makes that. They've got to feel like that there's a built trust to be able to manage both of those pieces. Then I guess the answer would be yes. However, I would say in most cases, when you don't have the bandwidth or the core competency, because it's just not your thing, I would say generally the answer's probably got to be no, because you don't have that ability to make sure that you can trust them in both of those roles.
I think now David's the politically correct one. He's answering that with both. But it is a funny question, right? It's a little bit like asking how long is a string. Because if you haven't gotten to the point where you've set your metrics and you know what's valuable to you, if you haven't gotten to that point where you're engaging a vendor on that level, you don't know if it's a good fit. So, it is kind of a yes or no. Yeah, in some cases yes, in some cases no. But you have to do the work first to say, this is what's valuable to me. And now I'm going to hold my vendor accountable. And now I'm going to talk to my vendor. If you don't know what your metrics are and your vendor's always telling you these vanity metrics, right? We're talking about moving from vanity metrics to value metrics. That's the standardization that Brian's trying to inject, right? Doesn't have to be mine, but we've got to speak the same language here. It's Tower of Babel. You're not going to get anything done if you're not speaking a language that everyone can understand. So you move from vanity metrics to value metrics, and now you say, hey, you know what? This vendor can't be my digital agency, or it can. That's the evaluation process. There's difficulties there, and like I said, some vendors don't do everything, right? So they can't necessarily be your digital agency.
Right. But some will try to push harder to provide agency services, something incremental. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we see this a ton now with companies that were selling newspaper advertising, and now they're in the ad space because there's money to be made here. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad, because they can employ really good people, but it's kind of a silly question in the sense that you have to find the expertise of the people you are working with, and if you could find it in one agency that can scale your business and do the right things with a great account manager, then it could make sense. If they don't have that expertise, find it and make sure they work together as a partner with all your other vendors.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It does depend on how you've engaged with your partner. I mean, if you're just buying the lowest level OEM approved co-op package, then no, they're probably not going to provide the comprehensive agency services that you need from them. But I think when possible, you should have the same provider, or at least be at the table together all the time, because your brand strategy, your brand differentiation should be driving your ad strategy every day. And then there should be the feedback cycle, right? What's working, what's resonating in your market, where are you getting beat, should be feeding your brand strategy. So that continuous feedback loop, whether it's with one provider or providers working very close together, is where I've seen dealers really differentiate themselves.
Yeah. And in my general experience, if you've got a complex dealership and you're trying to build that brand, you need that agency service and help. And whether you can get it from your media providers or you hire an agency, it just helps you to get your thoughts together. An agency is not just about the creative element. It's really about the strategy. So clearly it's a pretty important part.
I think it's pretty telling, too, once you get to that point, asking, hey, I got Dealer Inspire over here. They're providing me something that you're not. do you mind jumping on a call with them?
Right.
Right? And people really show themselves then. You can see if it's a fit. If you're out there trying to solve a dealership's problems, you should be willing to get on the phone with just about anybody in the dealership.
Yeah.
And if they're not, if they're like, oh, no, that's not how we do things, probably kick rocks, right?
So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk a little bit about attribution and how advertisers can navigate the waters of attribution, right? I mean, it's fairly complex out there when you start to think about, I'm putting Facebook in the market, I'm putting paid search in the market, I'm putting display advertising, I got multiple display strategies. They're all interacting with one another. There's some great tech to help you, pull it all apart in Google Analytics, but who gets credit for the sale? Who sold it? How should you think about that in your guys' opinion? What do you recommend to the dealers of a way to actually do it versus just understand it theoretically?
A lot of words.
I advocate no-touch attribution. I want to start that trend. Like there's no touch, none whatsoever.
No touch attribution is what he said. All right,
So-
and he actually means
so-
something by that. We're going to push him.
Yeah, so I'll say that it's a tough deal, right? And there's a whole conference built on this that we're here today talking about it, because it's I think at the very basic thing you can do is not use last click attribution and make sure your vendors are tagging things properly. I mean, if you leave here with with actionable data today, I can talk about all the fancy stuff we're doing, matchback, and we'll touch on Roxanne a bit. But if you look at other attribution models, and you could play around with them. It's not something you set, and you measure, and you start to measure those. But I even go back to basics to make sure that you have one UA code. You'd be shocked how many dealers have their Google Analytics codes on multiple domains. Like, you can't even start to have the conversation about good data if that's not correct. So start with the basics. Like, leave here today just with the basics. And what I like to measure is I like to look at mediums by source and measure them over a time period, because nothing makes sense unless there's a comparison. And getting to like a composite data path is good, but unfortunately, every single vendor in this room uses events differently. And that causes bounce rate as an example metric to be completely flawed, because Google changed the definition of bounce rate. I have screenshots of this in 2011. It used to be if you visited a page and you left, that was a bounce. Then they changed the definition. They didn't send out a press release on this. And it's basically if an event isn't triggered or is triggered, then there's no bounce. So what does every vendor do in 2013? Create events. And now they're literally advertising themselves saying, hey, go with us, our bounce rate's 0%. Does that help anyone in this room? You're telling me your website changed consumer behavior that much? It's ludicrous. So what I want to say is whatever you're doing, make sure that you're looking at the basics and you have something to compare over time, because then you could start to measure things. If you add said vendor, now you can see, is there a net lift, right? But you cannot do that if you do not measure or you do not have the proper tracking set up, and it starts with the basics.
So this can all get really confusing really, really fast, right? So, David, you got to tell us, what the hell do you mean by no-touch attribution?
Yeah, I'm kidding. I just totally made that up.
David's drinking wine. There's wine in here. There's wine in here.
I mean, we're in Napa, right?
Right.
Marla,
Okay, good.
You and I have had
we
some
some?
conversations about interesting ways of using mobile technology and kind of making the old new again, right, for measurement. You want to go into a little bit of that?
Sure. I think it is interesting what we're seeing in mobile device and location-based data now. I talked to one of my good friends who is a senior marketer at an OEM, and he is measuring how many opportunities are at dealerships every single month, and the number, physically. So looking at every single customer that physically goes to a dealership, we're talking about, say, 3 million consumers that we know. I mean, would you consider them in market if they're going to a dealership? Even if you cut that to 60% or 50%, cut it in half, do the old Joe Verdi, cut it in half. You're talking about real intention. when they're physically at a dealership over a period of time. And they can even see the location within the dealership. So service versus sales, that kind of data. And so you start overlaying that into your decision making, going, okay, there are these, here is the number of total opportunities and at my dealership. And how do I back into making sure that I get my fair share within my market to sell X number of cars, I think is a more interesting conversation than some of the other ones that I have.
What I find really fascinating about this is using technology to kind of take an old way of measurement, which is, hey, we did this full page ad, did people come in, right? And you're asking the floor, and was it busy? And it's kind of very similar, right? Did people come in? But instead of asking the human people that are there, you're actually looking at the data coming from the mobile devices. Now, to take advantage of this, I think you gotta be fairly structured in what's changing at any given time, right? And that's where you gotta have an agency, you gotta be thoughtful about what you're laying out, right? But if you go in and you decide, I'm a Chevy store, I'm gonna do a big Toyota conquest, I hold things consistent, you start seeing an increase in Chevy owners or Toyota owners that are coming into your dealership. That's an interesting thing. You start to see that lift, you're over-indexing, right? And I think there's going to be some of that newer technology that's going to come to bear. And I know at the OEM level, they're starting to do more and more of that.
Well, Max, you can even take it, if that's not your thing, if you don't feel like that's your core competency, then you can just take sales and defection. If you just look at defection within your dealership and say, okay, I have to move the needle there. So I know that I lost within my opportunities 120 sales last month. I need to cut that to 80. That's something that any of you can do right now. That moves the needle. That increases your market share, decreases your defection, and then everything else kind of, goes in stride.
Bigger macro movements, yeah.
I think somebody was talking recently, maybe this morning, about how Brian's team came in and said, let's take your spend down to bare bones and rebuild from there. So there is a piece of this
zero-based
where
budgeting.
You might have a mess right now, right? Some dealerships are further along the path, and some have gotten so far that they're like, I don't know what to touch because the whole thing's going to fall apart, right? There's that scared. I don't want to break it, because I don't know what's working. You might have to do some demo.
Yeah, sometimes you got to have some courage.
Joe said something very important: over time. Right, so the automotive industry is a 30-day cycle, and there's all this pressure. But sometimes when you're building a strategy, it's going to take a little bit of time. And don't do too much at once, right? So this makes it palatable, because if I do 3 things and something worked, I go, oh, which one worked? Which one was it? So there is a process here. It's got to be a goal that you set. Use a conference like this conference or something else as a goal to say, hey, by next year, 3 things I'm going to do. And then implement those on a longer time frame than your 30-day cycle. Because if you do the 30-day cycle with this stuff, you guys know it, you're busy.
I think this is something that Brian is great at, setting those goals up for
and
his accounts. You're
gonna have a month that just doesn't go well. And as far as last click attribution, it's kind of become a joke, right? I think of The Jerk. Have you ever seen that movie where he's shooting the oil cans and he looks and he's going, it's these cans.
Yeah.
It must be the cans. That's last click attribution. Sometimes you're not thinking far enough behind to think there's a lot more to this. It's more of a recipe. It's more ingredients. And if you might think something's not important, you take that out of there and suddenly your cake's not rising. So that's what you want to be.
I would also add annotations and notes in GA. If you're using GA as your source,
that's a good tip.
And you get a new internet manager, let's say, put it in there. Like, you have to correlate KPIs and what's going on in the real world with what's going on with your data. Because you can go back, if your data's set up right, and look at traffic over time, but you may not realize what happened then, especially if you're looking year over year.
Now, one of the really cool things about measurement is that it's about web analytics, right? It's about this technology that measures and segments, and you use it kind of as measurement and to hold agencies, vendors accountable and to get more efficient. But other good byproducts come out of this. There is interesting data that can be used in ways other than just doing measurement. And I know there's audience activity that a couple of the panel members are doing right now. I thought maybe Joe or Jen, or all you guys have got something going on. Talk a little bit about the way that web analytics is being used for more than just measurement.
Well, I was going to maybe piggyback on the last question first, which is that I think you have to leverage technology, right? I mean, you want to be as smart as possible about your data, but ultimately, particularly as there's more and more channels getting thrown into the mix, you've got to have technology that's really making real-time decisioning around where to spend your next dollar. So what combination of activities are most likely to lead to high converting customers? And that's constantly changing, right? So you're throwing Amazon in the mix, Facebook, whomever else is there. And if you just are setting things in discrete channels and not optimizing based on a combination of metrics, right, then you're being inefficient with your dollars. And so then again, related to what you're talking about, Max, is that combination of metrics tied to the behaviors of those shoppers, right? So being able to segment shoppers, who's most likely to buy, and how often do you need to be in front of them, and with which messages, right? So I know we talked about machine learning earlier today, and I know we've been accused over the years of not being very transparent around our technology, and that's something that we have to work on so that you have the trust in the technology, because ultimately for you to win, you need to be smart about your data, but you've got to leverage the tech to optimize based on what's going to get you the most efficient use of your dollars.
So I'll answer the question regarding tracking. So one of the things, the other reason, so I named one reason that Dealer Inspire was created, but the second one was we started off as an SEO and SEM company, launched digital marketing. That was my first company. And we were doing advertising for a dealer, and we did it for a year. He had a good, healthy paid search spend and SEO spend, and he called me in his office one day and kind of called me to the carpet and said, show me a person that bought a vehicle, that has purchased a vehicle based on your efforts. And I didn't have a good answer for him. I pointed to Google Analytics, and I said, listen, we set up goal conversion tracking. We felt like we were pioneering that then. And we tripled your traffic. We doubled your leads. He said, good, show me someone who bought. I couldn't. I couldn't attribute a person's name. So the idea came up in a meeting to say, okay, well, what if we control the website form, we can look at a referrer and at least put a cookie on that customer and then capture that first click. So I knew back then last click was not a good way to measure. So we used first click attribution. We created part of our products, the True ROI dashboard, that's still around today. So that would measure engagement. When someone submitted a form, it would essentially tie that into the notes section in the CRM, which is kind of garbage because it's not structured data. But at least we would know off of reporting where the customer came from, if it was Google paid search, SEO, and so forth. Then we took it a step further, and then with our integrations with DMSs, we were able to match that customer's name back and then work backwards and say, okay, did this customer buy a vehicle or service their vehicle? How much gross profit was made, or in some cases lost? And then equally weight based on first click that Google did X, or Bing, and so forth. And we found some crazy stats. So like, for example, in 2012, I knew that if you're in Florida and you're not advertising on Bing, you're losing, you have a lost opportunity of significant gross profit. Why is that? Because the demographics in Florida, they're opening their computers and they're clicking the big E button and they're going online to buy a car. They're not changing browsers or anything. So advertising in Bing made a lot of sense because it was the default search engine, right? So having that data, and this is really important. We could talk about data all day long, but what do you do with it? So then we started recommending to our dealer partners, you really need to advertise in Bing, and here's why, especially in those older demographic markets. So fast forward a couple years, when you look at the attribution models of Google Analytics, they're decent. You got last click, first click, time-based, and there's like 5 other ones. But there's nothing event-based. So we filed a patent on event-based attribution in 2014, 2015. It's still pending. God bless the USPTO. So, but still, and what the thinking was is you can't equally just put a big weight on something because you don't know that customer intent at that moment in time. But what you can measure is what are these consumers doing on the website before they buy a vehicle. So now we're able to, through something called Roxanne, have a UID on a customer that's loaded through local storage, HTML5, that will actually tie in to that consumer's name if there was a form submitted or a phone call made, and track that consumer to the point where we're seeing consumers coming from cars.com. We're capturing 40 million events per day. So basically what's happening now is we have these anonymized IDs, we have all of this traffic and all of this information of these events that were meaningful. What a consumer actually did on your websites. And then if we know they bought a vehicle, then we can work our way back upstream to say, hey, if a customer was on cars.com doing X, Y, and Z, the probability when they get to your website to convert is much higher. So then we start to do fun things like modeling. Again, none of this matters unless it helps you sell a car. So it's our job now to take that modeling and that customer segmentation and do automated things like personalization, like show different offers through our chatbot, and do things because we know who the consumer actually is. Maybe not their name at that point, but we know based on behavior of consumers that have purchased vehicles, this next consumer, they are exhibiting behavior that they're likely to do something. So we need to treat them a little bit different.
Yeah, I really wonder whether anybody could buy a car in the United States without being modeled by somebody multiple times. Because, yeah, stuff's being captured constantly all over the place. Yeah, that's some pretty cool technology. There's a lot, I think, development in all this. So the question of the whole panel, like, if everything is about sales, then why not? Why not just tell them how many sales from the digital activities that have gone on? And I'd like to hear actually from each of you. You might have a different perspective on it, but why not? That would solve an awful lot of things here.
Tell them how many sales you mean in terms of
how many sales did you drive in total? Yeah, that's the only thing you get rated on.
So I would say it depends on the products that we're talking about, right? So if you're a solution that's added to a website, you can't really take full credit. For example, online shopper. We get matchback data, so I can show you how many customers actually bought a vehicle. But does that help you with your marketing efforts and what drove those customers to your website, right? So there's a lot of different things to measure. It's a very complex answer because I can't go into a dealership and say, hey, conversations and online shopper and the website, collectively they made up for 90% of your sales, because what drove those customers to the website? And this is where then backing up and looking at some Roxanne type metrics to say, where did these customers come from? Were these customers on cars.com before? And we're seeing some crazy metrics like 4x of the consumers were on cars.com at some point in time that we just had no idea about. So because of that, that's actually really good for dealers, because if we have that data, we can model that consumer in a very different way.
Well, David, I mean, you measure everything based on sales, right?
Sure. I mean, you know, so Urban Science has arguably the best new car sales consortium, because they get it straight from the manufacturers the next day. So there's great match back. And so I would answer your question. There are two answers to it. Number one, if everyone did sales matching, then we would show probably 17 times the amount of actual cars sold. Seriously, and that goes, I think that goes to Joe's point. Like like not everybody can take credit for the sale, so you have to figure that out. The other one is there are a ton of companies that don't want to have the connectivity to sales. Don't, because because when it's been done and it doesn't show favorable, it's certainly not going to it's not going to get to the person who probably should ultimately see it, right?
Yep.
Even crazier fact is, before I came up here, I was talking to Brian Pash, and he said, hey, let's do a drinking game in that if somebody says one word, you have to drink, right? And I said, okay, but I get to pick the word. And he goes, he says, okay. And I said, Bing, because I figured no chance that anybody would ever say it, and yet somehow it came up 3 times.
Do you say big or vig?
Bing.
Bing. Oh.
Who is it? Like, is that still a thing?
Yeah.
So well done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very
Did you
good.
pay him?
I had no idea.
Jen, Jonah, any following comments on that?
Yeah, so
To Bing.
tying back to Bing sales, Bing, I'm just going to try to get you drunk here really quickly, Bing.
This is sponsored by Bing, right?
As Bing was saying,
Pretty
Right
sure
now?
it's not.
Oh, okay.
Hey, wait a minute. That's 4 more times I got to drink.
Bing,
get
bing,
to.
bing.
Wouldn't it be great if every channel that somebody hit, their phone or their computer just spit out a paintball, and they walked into your front door and they had colors that represented. Tracking back to sales is what we should endeavor to do, right? Because we're talking about an investment. Digital advertising is an investment, agreed? What are you investing in? If you keep it as simple as, well, I'm investing in sales, well, you're being a little bit obtuse, right? So you're investing in data is what you're investing in. That's what you're paying money for, right? And if you get that data dialed in, like he was saying, and you constantly are curating that, you're getting closer to the audience that is being hit by other touch points, but you're only advertising to them instead of everybody, right? So you should talk about the sales attribution, but nobody should be taking 100% attribution for that. They should be looking at the model. If you set up an environment where everybody could be tagged, then all of us, vendors, third parties alike, would probably set up shop outside your dealership with our sniper rifles on and try to hit them before they got to that front door. And with last click attribution, everyone would be like, that door is really converting, because that's where they're coming in. So I think it has its place, but that's where everything we talked about before builds. You have to set a standard, and you have to be that person who decides what your brand is, decides what your process is, decides what your metrics are. Then you have to invite those partners in to say, hey, are you ready to play ball, right? And if you have 5 partners, it's not always about the one who says, I scored all the points. It's the one who had the assists. It's the one who did the intangibles that don't show up on the scorecard. It's that trust that you've already built because you're the source of truth now. Mm-hmm. It's not the vendor going, well, I did impressions, I did clicks, and you're going, well, I don't even know what's going on, so I guess I'll have to take that. You're saying, no, there's something else. You need to explain to me. Tell me, but why? Why was this important?
And this can be a key role that agencies can play when they're not the media providers. They can help in aggregating those folks together in the event that the dealer can't sort of do that sort of work themselves.
I think sometimes local agencies need to admit what they can't do well.
And sometimes they can't.
Because
they don't have the technical chops.
Say, hey, you know what?
It is complex.
Don't use me for this.
Yeah.
I like this vendor because they talk to me. Let's get on the call and let's all work as a team for this dealer. But really, as a dealer, you have to set that standard.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're going to get to the transparency and the efficiency and the collaboration we're looking for unless that trust does come together. And I think that's a really great point.
I think having been a dealer, what would be important to me is PII-based information. So for example, looking at a customer that bought a vehicle, for me to believe, I would want to see their name, I want to see what vehicle they bought, and then I'm going to see a trailing history of data time-stamped. Because you've got to make me a believer with facts. And that's where I'd like to get to as a provider, to provide that information back. Not to say that it's, one of the questions we talked about is, are we ever going to get 100% there? No. But can we get to a place where it is significant enough so we can model things, and not model customer behavior, model our marketing efforts, because we know what is going to work or not work.
Yeah. Closing comment, Jen?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think really tying the combination of consumer behaviors that are most likely to lead to a sale and constantly evaluating that as consumer behaviors are changing, right? A lead is not a lead. And what someone's doing on mobile versus desktop, and the combination of those things is constantly changing. So feeding that back into the ecosystem to get smarter about our mix is important, and we as partners should be providing that data constantly to you. So you should be asking for it if you're not getting it from us. But ultimately, it's the dealers who've got to look at your entire digital marketing investment and look at your ROI, and are you getting efficiencies and improvement in how you're spending those dollars compared to your sales.
Fantastic. All right, I want to make sure we leave a couple minutes here for questions before we hit the cocktails or the wine. So why don't we turn it over for questions? Do you want to get a mic?
I'll take Joe's. Joe, since you're on the panel, I want to ask you a tough question. In my workshop, we randomly picked a dealer, a Chevy dealer and a Toyota dealer. Both had 6 UA numbers on their website, which made me think, who is getting all the dealers' data? So can you be transparent for the OEMs you work with? Are you required to put multiple UA tags on the website so the OEM gets some middleman gets some, their uncle of the middleman gets some? How do we have 6 UA accounts on a single website?
So usually that is a result of multiple vendors wanting access to their own UA accounts to measure things differently. It's not the result of the OEM. I'm not saying that the OEMs typically use something like Adobe or other tracking mechanisms. It's not generally UA. So when we see that problem, it's a multi-vendor problem. And the multiple UAs on one account are bad in the sense that you don't know, or you may know who has access to those. The bad thing is when you take those UAs and those go cross-domain and they get put in Google's black box and you have no idea. We've seen in Google Tag Manager UAs within UAs within UAs. It's crazy. And honestly, until you look at that and say who has access to this, and unfortunately there's not a database to reference, it's a matter of looking through support tickets or if we migrated that site over and so forth. So the reality is, though, most OEMs, to my knowledge, I'm not in the weeds of tracking everything or on those calls, don't ask for 6 different UA codes.
Okay. How about questions from the floor on any of the topics about metrics and measurement?
I would say, too, if you have 6 UA codes on your site, the quickest and easiest way to fix this, and I've learned this from having my niece and nephew over, take them off. Because what I do when it's time for them to go to bed and they say, I'm not playing games, is I go on my Google Wi-Fi and I turn their devices off, and then they come up with a little knock like, I can't sleep. And then I know that they were actually using it. So just take it off. If it doesn't break anything, then you're all set. And if somebody calls, a vendor's like, oh, hi, remember me? I haven't called you in 3 months. Oh, was that yours? What were you doing with it? Let's talk.
Okay, that's, I mean, I like that. I like that. I'm sure the Chevy dealer that was in my workshop will be calling CDK tomorrow or tonight saying to shut them off. Okay, questions from the field? Wow. Oh, here we go. Jim. Come on.
What do you guys think, dealers are most vulnerable to being sold on as it comes to marketing metrics? What would you warn them or caution them to be aware of as a dangerous marketing metric to consider?
So I would say the product that's the most dangerous to me is SEO. And I say that in the sense that I've seen more oftentimes than I like to admit, agencies that get hired to do SEO and to provide their value, they go in and want to change the meta and all these tags on the website, and they end up getting fired like 2 months later because nothing worked. And then what do you have? You have a huge mess. So really try to get actionable outcomes and say, okay, what are you doing for me? How is this going to be reported to me? What can I expect? And if some of it has to do with changing the meta titles around, do not go with them. We know, I'm not saying we're perfect from an SEO perspective by any means, but we have the ability to look at data across a lot of websites. And changing the meta titles around or something like that is not going to help you sell more cars for the most part, unless it's screwed up. And then you're just left with a big mess.
I would say, this may not be the direct answer you're looking for, but all vanity metrics. If somebody is pitching something like impressions to you, click-through rate, with no definition of what they are. Listen, I saw somebody once that was advertising at a dealership call me, not naming names because it wasn't a big deal, but they said, man, they're promising me 98% conversion rates. I said, cool story, bro. What's a conversion? And they said, oh, it's this. And I said, that's all their tool does, right? Is that? Yeah. So 2% of the time it doesn't do its job. Is that what you're telling me? And they kind of went, oh, no. So this is where defining your metrics is important. The vanity metrics need to be put into value, right? You don't want to, just get sold on. We do, vendors, whether you're in product, whether you're these are our babies too. We're in sales, just like you. So we fall victim to Charlotte's webbing, I call it, right? Where we're putting out these, as soon as there's a buzzword, we got to catch up. This is some pig, right? This is AI, right? So here's the simple thing as a dealer. You don't have to understand it. Just say, hey, that sounds cool. Tell me what it does. Show me what it does. Keep it simple. Stop getting enamored with the buzzwords, because we get way too enamored with buzzwords. Really, we should be able to tell that story simply and understand it. And if we can't do that, then we don't earn the business. And that's what you guys are facing with customers too, right? They're coming in the door. We saw the trust factor for dealerships. I recently shopped for a car, and I work in the industry, and I still had the trust factor. I walked in the door, and I acted the part, and I said, hey, I was just wondering if you had any 2014 Toyota SE sunroof. I had done all my research, but I was still putting them to task with it, right? I was still not sure. So really, the metric to watch out for is the one that they're not able to explain and that doesn't have a point of reference.
So I would tell you anything around digital advertising that falls in a co-op bucket. So, and I'll tell you, no, listen to why.
That's a can of worms there. I love that. Come on. And you saved it for 528. You jerk, jerk, jerk.
Hey.
I tried to get it out of him.
Yeah, anything that has to do with Bing, don't buy. No, the reason I say this is because I think the dealers get lazy, or they just finally give up when they say, okay, look, I have to do something in this space. It's co-op eligible. The OEM wants me to do it. I just am going to do it. And then you end up doing it, and then you really aren't bought into it, right? It's not your thing, and it just runs, and you don't feel like it's really costing you money, but it really is. And everybody goes, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, it's because nobody's paying attention to it. Nobody feels like they're having to stroke a check for it because it's coming out of the part statement. You know what I mean? That's why I say that. I don't say that co-op is bad. I mean, we have co-op products. I think if you feel like it's best in class and you're bought in, then you spend the money because you're going to spend the time and the effort behind it to do it.
So we have to stay on time. I want to ask a tough question. Tough one. As I traveled around the country looking at dealers' marketing investments, and our morning speaker, Chip Perry, was up there, here's what I found. Dealers aren't setting up conversion goals. They're not measuring what people do on their website. They're leaning in on digital marketing products. They have no idea what's attribution. They have no idea, but they think TrueCar is expensive at $300 a sale, not lead. So they have one of the few only business models that's aligned with the dealer's success, yet most dealers think they're expensive. How is it possible with all these things and the challenges of attribution and no one's looking out for the dealers, that dealers have been convinced that that's expensive when really, when I look at the data, they're spending a lot more to generate a sales opportunity? How do we explain this panel that we know it's difficult to measure any sales results accurately, and yet the few companies, David, you're aligned with sales success. Someone comes in with a showroom, you give a gift card. Why is everyone else getting a pass and the people who are aligning success get kicked in the teeth?
Joe? Oh.
I mean, you kind of set up the question for its own answer, right? The reality is you have to have a balanced marketing budget, so everything can't go in one medium. The model per sale is a viable model in the sense that you're only paying the vendor if you're selling a vehicle, right? It makes a lot of sense. But because of the competition of like Google, which obviously you are referring to Google, and so forth, the cost per click is up significantly when there's co-op programs. And like I remember a few years ago, Kia, it was like $20 per click at one point because of the competition was very high. So at what point does it make sense or not make sense? And this is where you need to get creative. You need to work with the agencies that know what they're doing, that can measure things in certain ways, because there's a huge opportunity for a lot of waste very quickly. But to answer your question, I firmly believe that everything should be based off a sale in some way. But it's my job as a technology provider to help quantify that sale and the measurement of that customer. Because even if someone came from TrueCar, they probably were influenced in other ways too, right? So it's like, how can we get the full picture on that consumer?
Right. Thank you.
I think there's a cost to transparency and honesty, unfortunately. So there is an initial, the more transparent you are, especially in digital advertising, because let's be honest, you guys deal with trust issues. There was a good period of time where digital advertising was very irresponsible. They were selling you impression share, right? And just moving your market out another 50 miles, as if that made sense. So there's a trust there too, right? So when you're honest and you're open to critique, you can get blasted. I've caught people running advertisements in Nebraska for a Texas dealership, and anytime I come across that, I send it out. I just send it to the dealership, say, hey, this isn't sales. This is your bottom line. Your ads are showing in Nebraska. Why? Right? There's a lot of that out there, and if that doesn't come to light, we don't ask questions of the ones that aren't saying anything, but then when somebody comes up and tries to be transparent, then we start asking questions. I think we heard that about the pricing model, right? Oh, don't tell them the price because then they'll shop us. They're just shopping us with other dealerships. So I think part of it is that too. Once you bring up something that is open and honest and transparent, it's open for scrutiny.
I think what Jonas said is 100% right, and I'll strip it down and make it kind of easier for me to understand. Like when TrueCar does what they do, they're opening themselves up. It's like somebody who posts a picture on social media, right? They're taking the step out, and they're going to say, "Look, we're going to do this," and that's what TrueCar did. They said, "Look, we're gonna match sales up, and this is it," and it exposed them to all kinds of stuff. Now you could say that maybe that was, it's pre-chip where that really started, and you don't hear that as much over the last few years. I would say that I don't hear it as much. But when somebody posts something on a social network, they're opening themselves up to shame, right? And people will come out and they will bash them, right?
Yep.
And so when no one else does it, it's a lot easier to kind of hide because you're not putting yourself out there. So,
Well, I want to thank everyone who's been on the panel. Max, great moderation. Give them a big round of applause.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Good job.
Hi, this is Brian Pash, founder of PCG Companies, and I'm glad that you enjoyed some of the excerpts from the Digital Marketing Strategies Conference in the beautiful Napa Valley. Coming up in November is the Automotive Analytics and Attribution Summit. It's in beautiful Palm Beach, Florida. It's November 17th, 18th, and 19th. I encourage you to go to the website, Automotive Attribution Summit, and purchase your tickets. Last year, we sold out. This conference is available to dealers, OEMs, and automotive industry leaders on the vendor side, developer side, or analyst side of the business. Remember, we have a special rate at the Breakers Hotel, and it's important that you book early because we have a limited block of rooms, and since so many of the activities are happening at the Breakers, you wouldn't want to miss staying at the hotel and being able to conveniently attend the cocktail receptions, the workshops, the keynotes, and the special events. Keep in mind that those of you who'd like to come a day early, we have a full day Google Analytics certification class, and for the first time this year, for data-driven automotive professionals, we're going to have some specific training on Google Tag Manager and Google Data Studios. So make sure that you make your reservations for both your tickets and your hotel as soon as possible.